seen the movie. You've heard the stories, whispered like secrets you're not supposed to know. But the real story, the one that burrowed itself into the Perron family and stayed there, is a kind of nightmare Hollywood doesn't have the stomach to tell. In January of 1971, a family of 7 bought a house in the Rhode Island countryside. It was supposed to be their dream, their slice of the American pie. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they had just bought a ticket to a 9-year-long haunting, a slow burn orchestrated by a thing with a grinning, awful past. This is the real story behind The Conjuring. It was the winter of '71 when Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, moved into a rambling 14-room farmhouse on a spread of land in Burrillville, Rhode Island. The locals called it the Arnold Estate. To the Perrons, it looked like a place where their life could finally begin. A fresh start. But a house like that has its own ideas. It has memories, and some memories have teeth. The dream began to curdle almost at once. It started with small things, the kind of things you'd tell yourself you were imagining. Carolyn would sweep the kitchen, and a few minutes later she'd find a new, perfectly neat pile of dirt in the center of the floor. A broom would go missing from its hook, only to turn up in another room, silent and waiting. It felt sometimes like it was moving on its own. The girls would hear whispers that sounded like wind rustling dead leaves and see things, dark shapes, scuttling at the very edge of their sight. Not all of it was bad at first. You see, some old houses are just crowded. The family spoke of gentler spirits, ghosts that seemed more curious than anything else. The younger girls even said a kindly presence would tuck them in at night, a phantom mother offering a goodnight kiss. For a little while, they simply shared the house. It was strange, sure, but you can learn to live with strange. That quiet understanding didn't last. Something else was in that house, something that had been sleeping. A darker energy, a malignant presence began to bleed through the floorboards like a stain. The playful weirdness was about to sour into a decade of absolute, grinding terror. The house had opened its door, but something deep inside had decided they were trespassers. As the weeks festered into months, the strangeness in the house curdled. It grew teeth. The most predictable piece of the nightmare came at 5:15 in the morning. Every single morning, no exceptions. The girls' beds would tremble, then lift clean off the floor, hovering for a silent, terrible moment before slamming back down. A foul smell, the sick sweet stench of rotting meat, would bloom in a room without warning, then vanish just as fast. Roger Perron had his own introduction to the house's true nature in the cellar. Down there, in the damp and the dark, he went to check the furnace, and was hit by a cold so profound it was like being dunked in a frozen lake. He said he felt a cold, stinking presence at his back. He never saw a thing, but he knew. God, did he know. He wasn't alone. Apparitions became part of the scenery. Shadowy things drifted down hallways like smoke. A sad woman in a gray dress would glide through the kitchen, a ghost trapped in a memory loop. But one entity was different. This one wasn't sad. It was hateful, and it fixed its malice on one person, Carolyn. This thing, the family came to believe, saw itself as the lady of the house. It despised Carolyn for taking its place. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a rivalry. The entity began a campaign of physical torment. Invisible hands would slap and pinch her. Unseen forces would shove her. The psychological toll was immense. She was being pushed out, worn down by an enemy no one could see or fight. But the worst was yet to come. One afternoon, as Carolyn rested on the sofa, a sudden, piercing pain shot through her calf. She looked down and saw a perfect circular puncture wound, weeping blood, as if she'd been jabbed with a big, rusty sewing needle. Gripped by a terror that was now impossible to rationalize away, the family started digging. They clawed into the history of the house, of the land itself. What they uncovered was a tapestry of misery, a story told in death and tragedy stretching back 8 generations. The local lore, the whispers in town, spoke of drownings in the creek, murders and suicides right there in the house. The place was sour, but one name rose from that muck of the past, a name that would give their horror a face: Bathsheba Sherman. And here's where the story you're told and the story in the books get tangled. The legend passed to the Perrons was this: Bathsheba was a Satanist who lived on that land back in the 1800s. The most gruesome part of the tale claimed she sacrificed her neighbor, as infant, to her dark master by impaling its skull with a sewing needle. The story ends with her hanging herself from a tree in the yard, spitting a curse on anyone who would ever live on her land. Now, the official records, the papers and dusty town files, tell a different tale. There's no proof Bathsheba was a devil worshiper or a child killer. The town clerk wrote that she died of natural causes, an old woman in her bed. But for the Perrons huddled in that house, the historical facts didn't matter. What mattered was the puncture wound on Carolyn S. leg, a wound that looked like it came from the very weapon in the legend. They believed the thing that hated Carolyn, the jealous rage that stalked their halls, finally had a name. They weren't just fighting a ghost. They were living under a witch's curse. At the very end of their rope, Carolyn Perron made a call to the most famous ghost hunters of the era, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed, a self-proclaimed demonologist; Lorraine, a powerful clairvoyant. The moment they stepped into the Arnold estate, Lorraine felt it, a dark, oppressive weight. She called it a malignant, inhuman presence and tied it directly to the ugly legend of Bathsheba Sherman. The family's worst fears now had an expert's seal of approval. But calling in the cavalry just made the enemy dig in deeper. The Warrens' presence seemed to provoke the entity, to make it furious. The attacks on Carolyn escalated, becoming more violent, more personal. The Warrens decided a simple investigation wasn't enough. They needed to hold a seance. This is the part the movie changed the most. What the family claims really happened was worse. Far worse. Andrea, the eldest daughter, says she hid and watched it all unfold. She describes a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. As the Warrens began, she says Carolyn's body was seized by something. Her chair lifted off the floor and she began to speak, but the voice wasn't hers. It was a guttural, ancient sound, a language not meant for human tongues. Then an invisible force hurled her across the room. Seeing his wife contorting on the floor, babbling in that hellish voice, Roger Perron snapped. The terror was too much. He was convinced they were killing her. In a rage born of absolute fear, he attacked the Warrens, screaming at them to get out, to leave his family alone. The intervention hadn't just failed. It had blown up in their faces. The seance didn't quiet the house, it just kicked the door to the cage wide open. After that night of ruin, the Perrons were alone. Utterly alone. The Warrens were gone, and the thing in their house was incandescent with rage. And still, they stayed. It's the question everyone asks. God, why didn't you just run? The answer is the most mundane and brutal horror of all. They couldn't afford to. Every cent they had was sunk into that farmhouse. They were financially chained to the place that was tormenting them. So for 9 years, think about that, 9 long years, from 1971 to 1980, the family just endured. The haunting became a part of their daily routine, a chronic condition. They learned to live alongside the terror, to navigate a life they shared with the dead and the damned. It was their grim new normal, a slow, grinding siege in the one place they were supposed to be safe. Life had to go on. Kids had birthdays, they went to school, they grew up. But it all happened in the shadow of a war they couldn't win. In 1980, after 9 years that must have felt like a lifetime, the Perrons finally managed to sell the house. They left. Andrea Perron says the moment their car pulled away from the Arnold estate for the last time, the haunting just stopped. It was like flipping a switch. The presence, the fear, the constant pressure, it was all gone. The spirits, it seemed, belonged to the house, not to them. But you don't walk away from a war like that without scars. The constant gnawing fear left a kind of psychological shrapnel in all of them. Roger and Carolyn stayed married for years after, but the children believe the relentless horror they lived through damaged the family in ways that could never be truly repaired. The story of the Perron family, chronicled in Andrea's own books, is a chilling reminder that some places are just wrong. Some places are sick. Subsequent owners of the house have had mixed experiences. Some report oddities, others have lived in perfect peace. Which makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is Bathsheba, or whatever it was that wore her name, still in that old farmhouse just waiting? Biding its time until the next family comes looking for their dream. There are other stories out there, other true tales darker and stranger than any movie. If you want to hear them, subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss what's coming. What do you make of the Perron case? Was it a true haunting, or just a family coming apart at the seams? Tell us your theories in the comments, and if you want more dives into the dark, don't forget to like this video.